Thank you for staying with us tonight on Phenomenon Radio Live. A fantastic interview with U.S. historian Richard M. Dolan. To find more on Richard, RichardDolanPress.com. Go over there and check it out and see all of the amazing books that Richard publishes there. You won't regret it. It's time well spent. As this show unfolds, with research actually unfolding in real time as we're on the air, we're going to jump off the second hour here with John Burrows. John?
Yeah, thanks, Race. Why we were doing the show, and Richard did question, could the Nimitz actually been out to sea in November with the Princeton? And the information I was looking at was a pretty detailed site, but I was able during the show to go on the Nimitz own webpage, and I was able to backtrack to 2004 on it. And it does show that late October through November 20th, the USS Nimitz was out at sea, but the training it was involved with mostly had to do with out in the Western Pacific towards Pearl, but it was out in doing a phase 1, 2, and 3 final evaluation period prior to deployment in the following year into the Middle East. So I was able to backtrack the fact that it is possible that the incident did actually take place. The first video did take place actually in November like they said it did. The question is, though, that training area wasn't really in the area they described in the video, where the March training was down more in that area. So I just thought I'd update everybody on what I did find having to do with that.
And John, what you mean is they identified November 14th, 2004 as being off of San Diego in the first video. And the second one, there's no identification, but you found where the Nimitz and the Princeton were together in 2005 on an exercise that was down in the water south.
There was an exercise. They were involved in an exercise in November of 2004. They were actually out doing training in 2004 also. It started at the end of October, and it said it was 23 days, terminating in November 20th of 2004. But the area and the training they were doing had more to do with the Western Pacific, which is out towards Pearl. But the training that in 2005 was definitely in the area that the video took place on. In other words, that particular training was shorter, and it was down in that area for the training area.
To Mexico.
Yes, San Diego to Mexico.
I mean, look, the Pacific Ocean's very, very big. So 100 miles off the coast of San Diego is that's really close to the U.S. And what John is saying is that they were way out toward Pearl Harbor, way out. Thousands of miles farther away. Nevertheless, I think this is a little more interesting. And from my position, I'm not inclined to debunk Fravor on this. He seems very, very solid indeed on it. But these are inconsistencies that we want to continue to work out. So it's very interesting.
Well, I would say that if people jump all over that, if it turns out to be true, it was a different date, that you would want to keep this quiet because people are going to do FOIA. And if you start asking FOIA questions with the wrong dates, they're going to say they have nothing available. But if you narrow it down to the exact date and time, then you should be able to get more follow-up information on it through Department of Defense.
Sure. I just want to go back to the gimbal video for a moment. I've been going through a really interesting analysis on metabunk.org that does this is a lot of sophisticated aviation experts talking about that image. And at least there's some talk about the object, because the gimbal video, it doesn't show a tic-tac shaped object. It shows an object that, well, I guess it looks like a flying saucer with a dome on it. But there might be the possibility that as one gentleman writes, the black shape around the object is a kind of IR, infrared flare or glare. In other words, the possibility is that what we're seeing in the video is not precisely, what the object is going to be.
Rich, there's white hot and black hot infrared. And
Right.
In some of that background material, it talks about in a transcript that To the Stars provided that they are in one mode of infrared and they flip it. So that when it's black, it's in one mode. When it was white, it's another mode in infrared.
Yeah. No, I take your point. I'm just suggesting that, I mean, for me, I would have a hard time doing an analysis of any video independent of the context in which it's shot. I just don't feel that I'm qualified enough to do it. So I handle all video with a lot of caution. And to me, it is all in the context of the of how it was released. This is why I thought Fravor and the Tic Tac video, which he talked about, was quite interesting, because this, I mean, if anyone has just missed the boat on what he actually described. I mean, what Fravor described is really quite extraordinary. I mean, what he said is that when he and his the other pilot went in to investigate this anomaly, which had been alternately at 80,000 feet altitude and then down to 20,000 feet altitude. And then when he went to investigate, it was at the surface level of the water or just above, seemingly connected to this frothing of the water on a very, very nice day. He goes down to investigate and the object comes up to meet him and then took off. As he went to intercept it directly, the object instantly took off and accelerated. He said it had to have gone at least 10 miles in 2 seconds, possibly as much as 50 miles. He didn't give those exact miles, but what he said is that visibility was 50 miles and 10 miles easy, and the object vanished to invisibility within two seconds. And so it's in the context of that description that I personally find the video very, very interesting. You know, he's saying, and I'm trusting that video is in connection with his sighting. And if that's the case, I mean, the video itself shows a very interesting shape. I don't know what kind of aircraft that could be, but again, I'm not an expert in it. And I do know there are people who would say that type of image would be consistent with a distant aircraft at a, far enough away, it could look like that. So,
well, Rich,
to me, it really comes down to what his statement is rather than the video, to be honest with you.
It's the most astounding part is where the object has been centered inside of the parallel lines of the gun camera, and then it seems like in a tenth of a second. It goes to the left. You see it. You can do it, with fingers, but it's just, and it's gone. And
this is consistent with his description of the November 14, 2004 incident. I mean, I assume this is what he's saying, that this was a gun camera footage from that incident.
This is the gimbal. This is the one that we don't have.
Right, of course. Right. I'm sorry.
So Fravor.
So that's a totally different incident. It's a completely different.
Can't be the same thing. Yeah, and the fact that moves the way it does, and he says, I have never seen anything go that fast. And he's been 18 years a Navy pilot, and that this is one of the most impressive videos of what happens.
Yeah, but this is the problem. What he said is that he never saw an object move that fast, but that was in connection to the Tic Tac video. So the gimbal video, which has that acceleration, that's a totally different situation altogether. I don't know what that incident is whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm saying Fravor is talking about the gimbal. He's talking about the gimbal video. That it's the second one that is released.
So he's talking about two different incidents. So what we have is a situation of this one pilot who is talking about two distinct UFO incidents. If this is what it is, and so the question is, when the heck was this gimbal video taken? And what does it represent?
Say that it's sensitive and still classified. It has not been declassified. But just to be clear, see, the 34-second in the New York Times is the one identified as being 2004 November off the coast of San Diego with the Nimitz and Princeton. That's not Fravor. Fravor is the gimbal that is not identified date, time, or place, and that's
well.
why.
I want to just say, Fravor explicitly did talk about a tic-tac shaped object. I mean, he was very, very explicit in his description of this. For example, with Tucker Carlson on Fox, he described it as tic-tac shaped. He was very explicit.
It may have been because he's looked at that video and he's been part of that release. But at least in terms of the two articles, when you go to the 16th and then the 18th, he's the 18th with this very interesting and more sensitive gimbal video release. He's the one who makes those comments about that. And he may have been commenting on Fox about the other video because it had been released 2 days before.
Yeah. There's a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
is it's actually a messy release of this information. So I think John's right. We need to do some FOIA and obtain as much detailed information on this as possible.
Well, the other question is that they said all this has been declassified, correct? The program's declassified or never was classified?
Well, it's supposed parts. I mean, the Times article indicated that parts of the program remained classified.
Okay, so now here's the problem. If the program, as they said, the money's been told about how much they spent, which I don't think they're being truthful with the total money spent.
Can't possibly be.
That if that's the case, and I remember reading in that article saying that none of this was ever classified. So I'd be curious to know if anybody did FOIA at all during that time frame, asking if there was any program the U.S. government was currently conducting, involving UFOs, UAPs, if they even did a FOIA. And because if they did and they said no, but the article says the DOD said this was never classified, then there in itself is a lie, number one.
Well, yeah, but how surprising is that? I mean, first of all, doing a FOIA with the behemoth of the U.S. government, I mean, the likelihood of you even getting what you're asking for, I think, is very, very slim anyway. So I think it's very easy for government agencies to elude any kind of information on FOIA requests. And I don't think that's a new phenomenon. I think that's
no, it's not. But I mean, for them to make the mistake saying that this was completely never a classified program, do you know what I mean? But the interesting thing then, he turns around and says he was involved in a classified program. And then he's made statements that he still holds a security clearance. But if he's left the government completely.
Talking about Elizondo?
Yeah. If he's left the government completely, which means he's no longer works in any capacity, it would either have been revoked or suspended. Now, if he still has a current classification, that means he's at least working for the government as a contractor, which means he's still tied to the government in this whole release.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But is he? I don't know the status that.
Well, according to what I've read, he still says he holds a security clearance. That came straight from Grant Cameron's research. So if he holds a security clearance, he's still working within inside the government in one shape or form.
So then the question is this an authorized disclosure by his superiors, I guess? I mean, if he's still working for the government and if he's still beholden to his security clearance, which it would make sense that he would be, actually, right?
Right.
Then on whose authority is he going public with all this information?
Yeah, and then why is the one video still classified? Why have they held that back?
Yeah, this opens up a lot of questions. And, is this a form of a limited hangout, limited disclosure? Because here's the thing, all right? I said earlier that this was damage control, right? But if it is drip, drip, drip by a higher up level in the U.S. government that's authorizing this to begin with through the original To the Stars release, well, then damage control from what? From the government's own released information. So if that is the case, then we have to really look at this in a fresh way. What exactly is going on? A limited disclosure, a limited hangout of some way?
Well, then the next question, Rich, think about this. Why now? I mean, people say that they're frustrated, but if you're tied down to government contracts, and some of those people on that panel they're working on government contracts.
Yeah.
They still hold an active security clearance. Are they going to come out and risk their security clearance and their jobs that they're doing within the government, and they're still working on different projects, to talk to the public about UFOs, UAPs?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I would strongly say the answer would have to be no. Like, they're not going to want to risk their clearances. So,
Rich, is it possible that there really is something pending that they are worried about, and that they feel pressured now to try to get some of this at least the ice broken?
Sure. I mean, it's entirely conceivable, Linda. I wouldn't want to speculate along those lines, because I don't know what it would be. Like, what is it that's going to break? I mean, this phenomenon, to me, on one level, is always seems like it's threatening to break. It never ceases. So the odd thing, though, is that for so many years, there had not been any significant new UFO sighting that you could consider a classic sighting that kind of broke through into the public consciousness. I mean, really, for a long time. I mean, go back to maybe Stephenville 2008, perhaps being the last big sighting that people really got worked up over. It's not the last sighting, obviously. Anyone can just go to the National UFO Reporting Center or the MUFON database. There are sightings all over the place. But of a sighting that really can get people excited, there's not been anything.
And it hit the world because of that videotape that went on for nearly 12 minutes of pulsing symbols in the sky, and that people might not know. I was given the video by people. I went to Stephenville, and I was there for 3 days and 3 nights and interviewed people. And I was handed a DVD of that original 12-minute video taken from a porch of this UFO that kept pulsing. I think it was twice a second, different symbols in the air. And I took it back and started at earthfiles.com, going frame by frame. I wanted to have every single symbol. And when I put up the first earthfiles.com report that had the first number of symbols, and I was going to continue going into the report, and I was looking in ancient languages to match, and did find some matches in ancient languages, I got first a phone call and then a hard letter in the mail from an attorney in Beverly Hills, California, a cease and desist letter to prevent me from unveiling any more frames from that video. And they sent a letter, a copy, showing that they had paid something like $8,000 to the man who took that video, and that the Beverly Hills attorney, that they were representing people in Hollywood that were going to make this film about this event in Stephenville. Now, to this day, not a single thing has emerged outside of the work that I have done. And you know what I did? I turned around after they said that they were going to threaten, sue, that it was really awful what they were doing. And it wasn't just to me. They did it to other people as well. But I then started doing pencil copies of the frames. I would hold them up to the light, and I started doing tracings, and I started putting those on at earthfiles.com. And I went for a while and realized it would be thousands of frames. But my point is, there were recognizable ancient symbols that were being pulsed in that sky over Stephenville, Texas, during that period of time when hundreds of people were seeing UFOs.
And you're saying that video is gone now? It's just gone.
I have the original video. Lots of people have put it up now. And that was the funny thing. They stopped me. I was directly in their gun sight. But within 2 weeks, it was on various YouTube sites, all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And so they did not want somebody putting the symbols in the context of, are we seeing an ancient language pulsing communication in the sky?
Okay, well, Yeah, it's fascinating, and you've always done great work on that and so many other cases. But that was the last major, in my view, the last major high-profile breaking UFO case that the public learned about. Until we learned about this one. Of course, this is back in '04, but it's new and it's interesting. I'm just saying that why, to answer your question, why do this now? There hadn't been anything going on, and if from the point of view of secrecy, you would think, hey, everything's going great. There's really no new sightings that are capturing the imagination of the public. So I don't have the answer as to why, if there were a government agency to release this, why would they?
I'm curious to know, because I know you touched on Podesta and you said you're not sure how committed he was to it. Do you think, based on the fact that they had a working group, like, one of those groups that they do, a think tank, they did it in 12, and they were working on trying to get disclosure out. Leslie Keane was involved in this. They brought a bunch of people in, military people and other people in for this think tank prior to, Hillary running for president. Do you think that they were going to do that? Do you really think they would follow through and do that? And when she didn't get elected, they had to change their approach. But again, why would that be such an important issue for Podesta and Clinton in the first place, number one? And number two, once that fell through, are they still trying to push this and force this, along with the fact that Trump walked away from the question on the White House lawn when he was asked directly about it? And when does he ever walk away from anything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the think tank, I assume you're talking about Podesta. Really, it's not Podesta's think tank. It's DeLong's think tank when he was with it was General William McCaslin.
No, this was prior to that. This was
Kerry. Oh, okay.
This was in 2012, and they actually wrote about it. And they had a think tank, and King put it together for Podesta. And they brought a bunch of people in on that. And this was before DeLong even surfaced.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. That's the other one. Well, I've never heard a single. There's no reason, in my view, for Podesta to be behind a disclosure effort. I just don't see it. And particularly when you're running a campaign for Hillary Clinton, other than to get the UFO vote, which I think, 2016 is a different era than prior elections, where the UFO subject isn't quite the touch of death anymore. And I think, as an astute political man, Podesta realized that you could probably win a cool factor out of the UFO subject, and I think he assumed it would work well for candidate Hillary Clinton. And to me, that is the only reason why they were pushing the UFO subject. I don't see any public interest reason whatsoever why he would actually promote disclosure for real. I don't care what he said in earlier years. I know he had his own press conference and said, it's the law and it's the right thing to do. But that was then, this is now. I just don't see it. It's way too disruptive. It's one thing to say it when your party's out of power, which is what he did, and it seemed like a really great little idealistic statement. But when you really get down to it, actual disclosure, no way. And going to the effort by Tom DeLong when he was gathering the generals, and it was Robert Weiss, head of Lockheed.
Right.
There's no evidence. There's no reason to think that Podesta was on board with any of that. Podesta was polite enough to listen, and he was maybe interested, but that's a long way from saying that Podesta was actively on board with the program. And I just don't. I mean, maybe Tom DeLong can answer this a lot better than I could, but I can't see it. Can't see it whatsoever.
Well, then the next question is, okay, Trump walks away from it, and this was making news all across the country, including D.C., and he was asked a direct question. He turned to walk away with his chief of staff, Kelly. But what information did they use, do you think, that would get Harry Reid to sign on to this? And then they put it out for bid, and obviously Bigelow got it. But that stirred up a huge controversy too, was Reid just throwing some money towards Harry Reid and and Bigelow, and he did get into defense and everything else. But then you also have Bigelow, where I always laughed when they said he bought the contract from NASA and was building space hotels. I knew that wasn't space hotels. They're not going to put people in space, house them above the planet. They were using this for a military project going forward out into space. So what would drive Harry Reid to even authorize this at all? What was he given to compel him to put any money up for this?
He was interested in it. At least what we are told is that he did have an interest in aviation space phenomena. He could very well have had an interest in UFOs. He is friends with Bigelow, who's deeply knowledgeable. I think we have to assume they had long and personal conversations about the subject. I think we can probably safely say that they both know it's a totally real phenomenon. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, Bigelow is probably, I don't know Robert Bigelow personally, but he's obviously one of the most knowledgeable people around on the subject of UFOs. He's been deeply involved in this for a long, long time, and he's friends with Reid. So I think it's safe to assume that Senator Reid knew a heck of a lot about the UFO subject, and probably thought quietly he could fund a program dealing with it to a limited extent. Well, I don't see any reason to think otherwise.
What do you think about now? The next phase is supposed to be releasing information on the Bass report, and then also that they hold some technology that they've gotten from UFOs. How are they going to explain that? As soon as they start talking about this technology, they're going to have to explain where they got it. So how are they going to tightrope this and be open about this? If they have to explain how they got their hands on this technology, number one. And number two, do you really think they've been open about what they have so far anyway? Have they really been transparent on this? Or is this just another case of we really don't understand what's going on still?
I don't know. I mean, I do know that, one of the bombshells of the New York Times piece was that Bigelow's Aerospace was analyzing technology or artifacts that come from these objects,
and has a whole building with them.
Yeah, right. So this is one of the stories that just hasn't really been discussed that much. It's like, what the heck were they studying, and what are the conclusions that they came to?
And why would they be allowed to do it and the DOD themselves wouldn't be doing it?
Well, we don't know that the DOD isn't doing it at all. I mean, I think it would be a great solution to have someone like Bigelow Aerospace do it. First of all, you've got one step removed from the actual federal government.
And it's like Corso. It's like the day after Roswell, that they've always been trying to get technologies of any kind into corporations to
privatize
and patent, so that there would be no FOIA, there would be no ability for the American public and taxpayers to ask the government. The government could say, we don't have it, because they set it all up in the corporate world.
Yeah, I agree with that, Linda. And I think that to me, it's the easiest and best solution is to have a qualified contracting company do the work for you.
Well, doesn't that bring up an interesting point, though? Congress always complains the Department of Defense withholds information from them and they're not fully briefed. Yet in this particular case, the head of the Senate authorized a program and put it out for bid, which, how did they put it out for bid? First of all, that had to have been kept secret. So they put out this bid, and these companies bid on it. Bigelow won it, and this information is all going on. Who was briefed on this inside of Congress? Who was involved with the Department of Defense, because it came out of their spending, so the DOD themselves had to sign off on this. These are all questions that haven't been answered.
No, I agree. I mean, technically, at least supposedly, the program, as you were saying, wasn't formally classified. At least that's the understanding that I've been getting from it. But it was very quietly done, and I don't even know if there were any other bids. I mean, for all I know, Bigelow had a no bid.
That was one of the things that Reid said, because when he got attacked for that, his comment was, we put this out for bid within the defense community, and Bigelow's bid won.
Well, that's what he says. I mean, who really knows?
It was
Reid and Bigelow are good. They're good buddies.
Yeah, and it was probably all arranged, and Reed would be the person who would know how to make all the pawn pieces on the chessboard go exactly the way he wanted to Bigelow Aerospace.
Well, and from Reed's point of view, I would imagine it would make the most sense to have Bigelow Aerospace do the work anyway. I mean, this is a man who's extremely knowledgeable. He's got a good organization. There's no reason to think that they couldn't do the job.
And Rich, remember that it was 3 years ago that George Knapp did an interview with Robert Bigelow about the fact that Robert Bigelow is the only person who has an official NASA contract to put his blow-up buildings on Mars as well as the moon.
Yeah.
That means that there is now a focus on Bigelow Aerospace in terms of whether it's Elon Musk gets to Mars first, or now the guy who runs Amazon wants to go, Bezos wants to go there. And China, we haven't talked about China. China says they're going to start building a base in the South Pole of the moon within the next year or two.
This is all fascinating. Like, really, it's worth asking what is going on suddenly with all the enthusiasm and excitement about getting to Mars.
I have a question for you guys, though, that you maybe can answer, because I have trouble keeping track of all the names. Who was the general out of Wright-Patterson, and what was his job that was supposedly identified?
Are you talking in DeLong's conversations?
Yes, the one that got leaked out, that was leaked out through WikiLeaks. There was a general out of Wright-Patterson.
And he now works at this company in Albuquerque.
That was McCaslin. He was the commander of U.S. Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force.
So
Major General William McCaslin.
Would that not probably be tied into the research itself? He would have been involved directly with the research, probably through Bigelow Aerospace and the technology they were holding then? Wouldn't it probably maybe have been held by the Air Force first out of Wright-Patterson?
Well, hell yeah. I mean, look, the research lab at Wright-Pat, when DeLong was talking about this over a year ago, this is the lab that would have handled any kind of material from Roswell. This is the lab that would have handled any kind of exotic crash retrievals of UFOs or alien bodies, for that matter. So I would think, if assuming that is the case, I'm going to assume that that's the case, that this laboratory is of critical importance within the subterranean classified world of UFOs. So yes, I would imagine McCaslin would know all about Bigelow and vice versa. I mean, I don't know, but I would think so. And
if it's true, which is what the New York Times said, which I was shocked that they admitted they were holding on to technology, and it was located up in the Nevada area, which they didn't really identify. I don't really think they said Bigelow himself was holding it at his facility, but you could put one and one together and equals two. It could have been.
Yeah, exactly. That was the biggest bombshell of the whole piece, in my opinion.
Right.
This is an admission in the New York Times that there were artifacts recovered from what we would call UFOs that were being studied with taxpayer money, and to what end, and with what resulting conclusions. Furthermore, the other bombshell had to do with effects on human beings.
Yes.
And in relation to their encounters with UAP or UFOs.
Which mostly probably has to do with military personnel, which, by the way, that program was identified in the book Phenomena by Annie Jacobson, where the Puthoff Group is working on, through with Gary Nolan, working on DNA studies involving people that have had encounters with UAPs, UFOs.
Exactly. And of course, this ties in with your excellent finding in the Project Condign report, having to do with the UK military's acknowledgement of explicit biological effects on human beings as a result of contact with the UAP.
And the Rendlesham Forest incident was identified in this report as personnel involved in the incident were overexposed to UAP radiation.
Where you were right there on the ground. It's all very interesting. I mean, I thought of you immediately, John, when I read the New York Times piece.
Right. And the thing is, here's the second shoe that I think is going to drop, Rich, and this is kind of speculation, but Nick Pope's been kind of hitting at it in his tweets and everything else also, was you have the MOD files, they released 15 of them, and they quietly released them. They make it impossible hardly to review, and they held back 3 files, which were policy files on the whole, who was involved in this and everything else. Now, within those 15 files, it's been identified that a memo stated that a UAP did land in Rendlesham Forest, which has kind of been not much been said about because they've kept these files pretty much under control. But they still haven't released the final 3 files. And the fact is that probably when they release them, this will be tied to all this disclosure. Because if you think about it, the majority of these articles are coming out of the UK, yet the UK governments remain quiet on all of this so far.
Right. Well, the majority of the New York Times piece obviously is
well, no, but most of the articles prior to the New York Times piece and a lot of these other information has come through UK papers, is what I'm saying. It did once the New York Times piece hit, it took off everywhere. But all the prior stuff and even some of the follow-up articles have come from UK papers, not from from US papers.
Yeah. Okay.
But the interesting thing was, Leslie Kean put out a tweet or a web page thing right before this hit, saying that she was right. Some of these documents that were classified that have been now declassified in the UK showed there was a program taking place with the UK government, the American government, and another government, which it presumed was Russia.
A collaborative UAP-related program?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's declassified. It was redacted in the initial release of these documents, but it was declassified and it was brought up. And of course, Nick Pope made the little comment, "I can't believe they released it. I never thought that would happen."
It's so funny because after all these times, particularly the UK government, which lies every bit as much, if not more, than the US government on UFOs, they've said many times that they have no collaboration with the United States on the matter of UAP or UFOs. They've made this statement openly. And here we are. It's obviously a lie.
But their appendix F as in Frank in the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena 3-volume report done by the DI-55 Special Intel Group for the MOD. They got the assignment apparently and put it into the hands of the head of the MOD in 2000, and then it was secretly unclassified in 2006. And it's appendix F as in Frank 4 that they made almost impossible to find. When I did find how to get to it, I have it all over in my earthfiles.com so people can go right to that appendix F4. And that is where that paragraph, it's under a section, mental effects. And this is about unidentified aerial phenomena, mental effects. And you come down 3 or 4 paragraphs, and it talks specifically about such as Rendlesham Forest and the people who were exposed to certain frequencies there that can do what? Can manipulate human minds and hurt, damage human tissues. And that's what that appendix F4 is about. And here I have right in front of me from the New York Times, the relevant paragraph. Under Bob Bigelow's direction, the company Bigelow Aerospace modified buildings in Las Vegas for the storage of metal alloys and other materials that Mr. Louis Elizondo from the DoD and program contractors said had been recovered from unidentified aerial phenomena. Researchers also studied people who said they had experienced physical effects from encounters with the objects and examined them for any physiological changes. In addition, researchers spoke to military service members, would be like John, who had reported sightings of strange craft. And then this next quote is from Hal Puthoff, who we know is head of the Institute for Advanced Research in Austin. He has a PhD in engineering, and he said, quote, "We are sort of in the position of what would happen if you gave Leonardo da Vinci a garage door opener." And he goes on to say that he has conducted a lot of research in ESP for the CIA and later worked as a contractor for the CIA. And then Howe says, quote, first of all, Da Vinci would try to figure out what is this plastic stuff. He wouldn't know anything about the electromagnetic signals involved or its function, close quote. And that kind of sums up the relationship of where we are about what are the UAPs, what is the terahertz that they emit that can damage human tissues and manipulate human minds.
Well, yeah, very, very excellent. I'm glad you mentioned that's the Appendix S of the Condign report.
F-4. You have to, they made it especially difficult to find on purpose, well, I'm sure.
I want to point out that if you go to the MOD's official explanation of the Condign report, I mean, it's out there. They make it very, very clear that they will state that the Condign report explicitly denies that UAP are extraterrestrial, and that's really not an accurate way to characterize that report.
No,
they're very, very careful not to go one way or the other and make that statement. But as you just pointed out, there are a number of cases where it's very, very evident to the authors of that report that they're dealing with an intelligent phenomenon. And so it just begs the question, if it's nowhere in the report are they saying this is Russian or any other national technology.
Well, not that, Rich, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it says that after they've had aircraft taken down by this phenomenon, that they commissioned a joint task force of astronauts and other personnel to look at this, including Russia was involved with this. So, yeah, how could it be Russian or Chinese aircraft?
And Appendix F4, Frank 4, has a graphic. It shows male bodies at different heights and different distances from what would be emitting the terahertz frequency. And it talks about the distances to each body, height and size, and the impact that they already know an awful lot. And in that discussion, where they are showing the humans in relationship to the terahertz, there is an entire paragraph. It's at earthfiles.com. I featured it in several of my reports. It talks specifically that the UAPs come in shapes that can be spherical, can be disc-like, can be cigar-shaped, can be triangular, all of these descriptions, and they talk about the sizes of the craft emitting the frequencies as they would be studying the impact on human bodies. It's all in F4.
I'm looking at it right now, Linda, and people really ought to Google this and find it. There's, and I see a nice picture of you at the top of this article, by the way. But yeah, and it's very, very, actually it's very well written, this part. It's very easy to read, and anyone can go into it. Say Appendix F4 of Project Condign.
That's right.
Absolutely laced out.
Deliberately, that was my French resistance motion to make it available so people can read it.
Well, I want to bring up a couple of things. I've been told that the Royal Condign report is still classified and will eventually see the light of day, just like maybe that Bass report and which was a 499 report they're holding back still. But I got a question for you, Rich, because I ran this by Linda earlier today. When Puthoff used the cleverly crafted, if we handed Da Vinci a garage door opener, what could that mean to what he's trying to tell us? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I'm not going to speak for him, but I know him just like the two of you guys know him and spoken with him, and I consider him he's a very valuable individual in this field, in my view. And I would simply speculate that that whole crew and that he is aware of such technology. How could he not be?
But I think it might have something to do with a portal.
Well, why? Why would you think that?
And what do you do with the garage door open and you open the door? So if you push the if they were looking at technology now that could go and open up warp drive or whatever, because they're obviously working towards warp drive,
Yeah.
which opens up a whole thing. Could that not also tie to a portal?
That's very interesting. Maybe.
And it was going 15 years ago. I had a discussion with somebody I would put in the category of a really valid, credible whistleblower who would never go public on anything. But this is what he told me. He said that we have discovered in all of our investigations of the UFO UAP phenomena, as has been discussed even in some of the articles since December 16th, that we're dealing with intelligences that know how to fold space and time so they move point to point. And whether the word is portals or tunnels in space or using gravity or black holes, it is point to point. It's not Euclidean going for 1,000 miles. Okay, so once you get there.
There's no question that has to be the answer.
Okay.
I mean, that has to be the answer.
And 15 years ago, this man worked at MIT. He was working on a project related to research having to do with UFOs. He said, as a statement, like a fact, that we have discovered that there is one of these, if you want to call it portals, space tunnels, that is natural in the solar system that we're in between Saturn and Uranus. And that this natural, I'm going to call it like a network, that there's networks of the natural and there are others that can be produced, but that there's natural links that are these point-to-point jump points, and that would explain why there has been so much traffic in this solar system for millions of years.
I think that's a heck of a hypothesis. And look, I'm not going to say no. I firmly agree that the way that these other beings have to get through the universe cannot be through nuclear-powered spaceships.
No.
Like our friend Stan Friedman loves to speculate about all the time. There's just no way. That cannot possibly be the case. They are able to manipulate space-time.
Well, terahertz radiation is the key to this, I believe, because if you looked at one of DeLong's interviews, he talked about having bisma and in how terahertz affects it and the frequencies affect it and what it can do. And Linda knows a little bit more about the bismuth, but it appears like that terahertz has something to do with the creation of the warp itself. Now, the interesting thing would be that not knowing a lot about it I would be curious, and this is what kind of set me back. There's a push to go to Mars, and they talk about mining up there. Is there some kind of mineral or whatever they need to be able to fuel the particular like warp drive or whatever it is up there on Mars?
Well, I don't know about that, but I do have to assume. I mean, what's really odd from a conventional point of view. Pretend that we have never studied any of this weird stuff that we study. Pretend that we're just ordinary citizens. And we hear these people talking about going to Mars. Any normally educated person would say, are you out of your mind? How are you possibly going to be able to have a base on Mars? I mean, the logistics alone just seem utterly beyond anything that we can imagine, even with what we've got going right now.
But
it just seems.
Is in the race with the Bezos to go to Mars.
Right. So that begs the question: what kind of black world technology are they quietly going to be using to get themselves to Mars? Because clearly they're going to be availing themselves of some of that. They have to.
Right. And could that be the reason why? Whatever. Let's forget about whether there be a false flag, like Greer pointed out that, if you go back to the think tank in 98, which I understood why he said that. The 98, they talked about terrorism and the threat from above. There's been Iron Mountain talked about it. There's been Von Braun talked about it too. But let's just say for the sense of argument, they're not looking at an initial threat, but we need to do something quickly. Then if that's the case and they need to get there for a certain reason or a certain resource, they're going to have to unveil this technology. There's no way they can keep it quiet any longer.
Well, it's not that they have to get to Mars, but if you've got the tech, you're going to want to use it. And it might just become more and more difficult to keep it completely sealed off from other individuals. I mean, it could very well be. In fact, I personally believe that the black world has had access to this type of technology for some decades. I believe in the ARV story of 1988. I think that we've been, versions, elements within the U.S. military structure, privatized and so on, have been able to leave Earth's orbit for quite some time. But ask yourself, how long could they do it before they have to start letting some other people in on it? I just don't think that they could do it indefinitely. So it's possible to speculate that Bezos and Bigelow and even Elon Musk might at some point be brought into the program in a quiet way.
And Rich, what if? Yeah. What if the biggest box is an existential threat and that they have some information that we don't have? And I'm thinking all the way back to 1988, a man who worked in the meteorological office at White Sands Missile Range called me because he said, I have information related to animal mutilations, human abductions, the whole 9 yards. And he came to talk to me, not really specifically about those subjects, as much as that he had a colleague in the Naval Research Lab, which has been in the White Sands Proving Ground and then Missile Range area. The Navy has been involved in there really since the end of World War II and the development of paperclip and so forth. And the Navy guy told him that we had in the 1970s, apparently with the help of some non-humans, we developed a base in a lava tube on Mars. And that the physicist that he was talking to, who is the NRL guy, said that he had been there 6 times. And he said, we are trying to get ourselves in a strong foothold on Mars because events could happen on this planet, might even be natural cycles of geophysical changes on Earth that might be tied into when the magnetic poles change. Whatever it is, it could be existential, and that they wanted to make sure that there was another planet with an ability to keep things going. And the last phrase that he told me that has always haunted me, he said, humans on Earth are like grasshoppers before the winter.
Yeah, I recall you telling me this story more than once, and it's always been chilling to me as well. This is like an alternative 3 scenario, what you're describing. Well, I think that there's a number of reasons why they would want to go to Mars, and I suppose that's one, as an insurance policy. I really can't say one way or the other. But I think it would be there probably would be a series of motivations that you'd have to want to go there if you have the ability to do it. Minerals, or it's assuming that there are others out there you might want to have a base to be able to deal with them in one way or another, whether as hostiles or in a collaborative way, for all I know. I don't know how I could speculate on why they would do it, but it would just seem a very logical thing that they would want to. So I think, I had a conversation myself about 15 years ago with a scientist. I wish I could mention who he was, but this was early on in my history with this subject. And I remembered exploring the whole controversies dealing with Mars at that time and not really knowing what I thought about it. And I wrote in correspondence to this one particular scientist who I think was very well connected. And I intentionally disparaged some of the Mars anomalies claims to this person. And I really was interested in his reaction. And he wrote back to me and he just said, you really shouldn't dismiss that. There's a lot of us in the classified world who are very, very quietly, deeply interested in those. And at that moment, I thought, oh, okay. And this is probably in 02, 03 at the latest for me. And so that was a signal to me always to take Mars seriously.
Right.
no matter what claims are made out there that you may or may not agree with, that there is probably something very important about Mars.
Exactly.
That, is
John
going on.
John Brandenburg told me that at UC Berkeley, he talked with a physicist in a library about some of the Xenon 129 data he was getting, and the man had he knew who he was, senior, had very advanced classifications access. And so when John showed him the Xenon 129 data he was trying to make sense of, this older scientist immediately said without his, oh yeah, it's those hydrogen bombs on Mars. And then the scientist stopped, like realizing that he was in the library and everybody in there was supposed to have certain clearances. But the scientist stopped. And that one moment is what propelled John Brandenburg to keep going with hydrogen or atomic bombs on Mars. Okay, and this led John, he spoke at that NASA conference in September of 2017, presenting his death on Mars hypothesis. He had several people come to him, he's told me this, and say, I can tell you this, there is a cover-up about Mars.
I think I'm looking at that very, very paper you're referring to. And this is about, I guess, what's called a hyper abundance in the Mars atmosphere of Xenon 129.
It's 2.5 times what we have in our Earth's atmosphere post 1945, dropping atomic bombs on Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and all the testing. Mars, 2.5 times. And he focuses it in Cydonia as being the region. Now, for people,
guys, I hate to cut you off, but unfortunately, this has been a great show, and we're out of time. So we're going to have to revisit this down the road sometime, 2018, which I think is going to be an outstanding year in developments that are going to take place.
Yay for that!
You know, I got to tell both of you, I always feel that I'm going to school when I talk to either of you. I learned so much, so it's a really good thing for me. I feel like I'm just coming along for the ride, but I'm happy to take the ride with you.
Oh, man. It's been wonderful. Rich, thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and John and Linda and Race and all the listeners. And I look forward to chatting with you guys again.
Absolutely awesome. What a wonderful way to kick off 2018 on Phenomenon Radio Live. A great freeform conversation about one of the hottest topics in ufology today. For John Burrows, for Linda Moulton Howe, the amazing Richard M. Dolan, I'm Race Hobbs, the producer of Phenomenon Radio, thanking all of you for joining us. Don't you go anywhere. 3 more hours of Jimmy Church Fade to Black Live. It's Fader Night. Kick off right after this on your contact for the very best in paranormal talk radio on the World Wide Web. This is KGRAradio.com. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody.